Howdy. It's another edition of ACC Baseball Etc, another speedy weekend preview edition of the show. ACC Baseball Etc is presented as always by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1 hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. I'm Daron Vaught. I'm normally here. You've seen Bradley Smart before. You've hopefully read a bunch of what he's done over at ACC Extra. He joins me for another speedy weekend preview, and we're just going to go through the matchups across conference play in the ACC, talk about them, see what we like, what we don't like, what we're excited about, and whatnot. Bradley, how are you, good sir?
I'm doing well. We got the first full ACC week, eight weekend series, so a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I'll let you pick where we start. In your mind, as you look through the matchups, what would be your series of the weekend?
Yeah, and I think for me it's Duke heading out to Stanford. I think that's just such a fascinating series because on one hand you have Stanford, who had the biggest or one of the two big statement series wins last week, and now they're 18th in the country, and they're welcoming in Duke, who for all of the stuff that's gone on with them in the early going, this is a good team that's starting to put things together. So I'm really excited to see how that series plays out because it could go in just so many different directions.
Yeah, it's interesting too. So I had the Friday game last week, Cal at Duke, and obviously we spoke a lot about the history that was being made there. It was the first ACC conference game for Cal in their history, and there was a lot of joking amongst Duke staffers that we get to make history, win or lose, 2 weeks in a row because we're Cal's first ever ACC opponent, and then we're going to be Stanford's first at home in their new stint in the conference. So I think that I don't know if it matters. I don't know if the guys playing really think about that as much, but it felt like Stanford wanted to make a statement against North Carolina. So I would imagine the idea would be to keep that rolling and make another against a Duke team that I, being one of us, a lot of us had as an Omaha team coming into this season, and they've not played up to what the expectations have been, even though, like you said, as of late, they're putting it together, and I think they're figuring it out.
Yeah, and I think figuring it out's the key here for Duke, which is why I'm so interested in this series, because they're hitting well. They're second in the league in home runs. Ben Miller's on an absolute tear. Tyler Albright's been, a breakout guy, kind of returning to his first year form. And then you look at the mound, and it's George Mason yesterday. They won again. We're recording on Wednesday. They won again today. But yesterday they turned it over to the bullpen, and it's 18 up, 18 down. Like, it's each guy throws 2 innings, no base runners, 6 Ks. And the bullpen, that's like the area where I think if Duke's going to do anything this weekend, that's got to be dialed in, because they don't necessarily have that luxury Stanford has of 3 guys that could go 6 innings every time they're out there. And so I think if Duke's going to win the series, they're going to have to get stuff out of the bullpen, and they're going to have to try to chase those Stanford starters early. And that's kind of what North Carolina did in the second game. They got to Christian Lim, who's kind of been a bit up and down, but then Joey Volchko just sealed that series. So I think that sort of balance is, can Duke's hitters do enough to kind of disrupt Stanford's pitching staff, or will Stanford get length and then be able to pick and choose when they're using those high leverage guys? So again, just a fascinating series to me.
Yeah, circling back to Duke, does it not just feel like kind of normal for them to have to figure it out, right? It would not look, we would all be over the moon because it's a team and a program that we like to see succeed. But if it was easy from the jump, I don't know that Chris Pollard or the coaching staff would even care to do that, right? Like, I just, they're so used to, with particular interest in the pitching staff over the past few years. They're so used to making adjustments on the fly, whether it be because they don't know that they've got 3 weekend starters, but they do have a lot of good arms. So they're just kind of piecing it together and molding it however it works out that way. Or if it's because of injury, like they had to do when Jonathan Santucci went down. It feels weirdly right. And I want to use that to relay into our next series because UVA goes to Cal. These are our 2 West Coast trips in the conference. And I think the same way about Brian O'Connor and his good Virginia teams. I don't again, we like this roster. I said, and I'm on record multiple times saying I think it's Brian O'Connor's best roster since he has been at Virginia. It just wouldn't feel right if he didn't have to figure some things out and mess around with a weekend rotation and that sort of thing, right? Like that to me feels normal for both of these teams, which is why I'm less worried than I am others who have not been as good as we might have expected.
Yeah. I think Virginia's in just such an interesting place overall because, going into the year, it's accolade after accolade. It's the entire lineup, essentially. You have confidence in, Evan Blanco. Season comes around. A lot of these guys get off to kind of slow starts. Blanco's still working his way back. And you're just kind of shuffling things around, trying to sort of get going. And you got to get going fast. It's not a long season. But I do think there's so much there at Virginia that it, like, kind of like you said, you wouldn't bet against things, figuring out, getting them going again. And there's been some good signs. Like Luke Hansen has just really scuffled offensively, hit a home run against Maryland last night. And then you have, guys like Eric Becker, Henry Godbout, Aiden Teal, Ford, they're all over 300. They're hitting more. And as you sort of figure out that rotation, ideally Blanco comes back, but you've got Jay Woolfolk's dealing. You've got Tomas Valinkis, the freshman, and you're sort of just trying to, like, I would say, steady things, find some footing, get moving. Obviously last weekend against BC, that's a frustrating one for them. They were right there in the finale. Credit to the Eagles bullpen for just completely closing that thing down. But yeah, I think this is an interesting series too, because Cal's one of the more confusing teams, I would say, in the league to me in the early going.
Well, you can't overlook them, right? Which is, I think, something that Duke figured out last week, and it just speaks to the depth of the conference in a way. Now, Cal is not going to be as a team as deep as a lot of the teams in the upper tier of the ACC, but they do have a pair of really good hitters in Advincula and Moutsouridis, and I mean they've got other guys too who can do some damage. Like you can't sleepwalk through that, especially when apparently they've got some dudes who are capable on the mound too. Austin Turkington was sort of the surprise of the weekend and really shut Duke down. Only 2 walks. Tyler Albright drew those in that Friday game. And at the time, going into the weekend, I don't know the updated count, but at the time, I think Duke was like number 2 in the country in walks drawn. I mean, they were a team that was seeing a lot of pitches, and they saw not a lot of pitches in that game, and it frustrated them. So, yeah, like I think this is, for obvious reasons, a bounce back is important for Virginia. But you alluded to this as well. Like now that we're here, it was a short on-ramp into the conference season. And now that we're here, there is a threshold at which if things are not fully figured out by a certain point, it starts to get really tricky, especially when you get into the meat of the ACC.
Yeah, it can snowball quickly. Like it's the same in the SEC. It's the same in a lot of conferences. If you start stacking losing conference weekends, it just gets harder and harder. Like you're losing confidence. You're seeing a lot of things you were striving for starting to like slip away. So yeah, I think it's a big weekend. And going back to Cal, the really interesting thing to me is going into the year, I think I would say I had a lot more questions about the pitching staff than I did about the lineup. I was a little worried about the lineup replacing a lot, but you have those cornerstones in the midfield or in the middle of the infield. Been watching too much Premier League. But you have those cornerstones, and then you have some interesting transfers, some role players. But on the mound, it was kind of like, who's going to throw a lot of innings? Like, you have a lot of unproven guys. You have guys coming back from injury. You have transfers that didn't have great numbers and are trying to find a start. And so far this year, like, aside from a few games where they've hammered 5+ home runs, Cal's lineup has kind of struggled to put up a lot of runs, but the pitching staff has been great. And one shout out in the lineup, I will say, alongside those guys, Cade Campbell, out of absolutely nowhere, is hitting 400. Doesn't walk at all, just puts the ball in play constantly. And 406 home runs. That is not something I saw coming.
Yeah. We talked about him a lot going into the series, that Cade Campbell didn't play a bit for them last year and saw limited time 2 years ago, and then has just been their guy. I mean, you mentioned the inconsistency of the offense. He's been the one staple that's been producing all year long to this point. So that is a worthy shout out for Cal. They're fun, man. I do this every year, and now that it's 16 teams in the league, I do it with 16 teams instead of 14 teams. But like, there's so much to be encouraged about for all these teams. And I don't mean that to say they're all going to make regionals, but like, Cal's fun. Pittsburgh is fun. They're teams that I am very, very fond of. So it was cool to see Cal in person and be able to see Cade Campbell deliver, and see probably my second favorite middle infield in the conference now. FSU leads the way there with Lodis and Farreau, which I guess is a good segue into Florida State. This is mostly looking ahead, but I had mentioned over the weekend not over the weekend, at the beginning of the week, talking with Danny, I had mentioned I'm really looking forward to seeing Florida State play ACC competition, because it will be that will be the barometer. And they didn't when other ACC teams did last week, but they were going to get, and I totally let it slip my mind when I said that about seeing them play tougher competition, they were going to have the number 17 in the country the very next day in Florida. Weird game. It's a midweek to begin with. It's not Jamie Arnold throwing. It's not Cam Leiter throwing. So it's not the fullest representation of Florida State, but it was good to see them against a top team and just sort of kind of gauge it that way. Florida got the win, but again, it was a weird game for Florida State.
Yeah, it kind of feels like one of those games where it's, you'd like to have the win, obviously, especially against a rival, especially at home. But it was one of those where, like, it just, it wasn't. I was also expecting big things. I was excited to watch it. And then, Evan Crest, who's been one of the best midweek starters in the entire country so far this year, throws, I think, 18 pitches, leaves with an injury, which there's not been an update yet, but hopefully it's not what it looked like, because it's never good to see someone pointing at their forearm and asking to come out of the game. But yeah, Florida just kind of put up some runs against different FSU relievers, and the Florida arms they ran out. And FSU really didn't get anything going, 2 solo home runs. So I think it's, but they got the first loss out of the way. I think they'll be right back at it when they run out their rotation guys this weekend.
Yeah, so they've got BC this weekend. It's in Tallahassee. For Boston College, if you can get one of these three following up a series win against Virginia, that feels like a win, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think Florida State's just, that pitching staff can just take the life out of you, where you just feel, even if you're chasing 1 or 2 runs, it's just Arnold, Vellini, Mendez. It's 6 innings, 7 innings, double-digit strikeouts. And I think BC's got, obviously a lot of momentum after that series in Virginia. And I saw him on Sunday in person, and And I thought they looked just as good as Virginia. They looked like they had good at bats. They brought out, Joey Ryan and AJ Colarusso, who was a starter, but logged 2 saves, against Virginia and has that competitiveness. And so I think they can easily steal a game if they get to that sort of duo. They can get it to Joey Ryan close. I think he's pitched in these big games. He's got a lot of experience, and I was really impressed with him. I was also impressed with the lineup. It was Nick Wang wasn't in it. I think he was under the weather, but they slotted in a guy in Esteban Garcia who, barely had any at-bats and just looked, great against good Virginia pitchers. But Jack Toomey's been fantastic since coming over from Holy Cross. And then you just have so much experience throughout that group of just guys that have played in the ACC. They've been through the grind. And I think Florida State, obviously pitching staff wise and lineup wise they're better than BC, but I do think this Eagles team is kind of the classic one where they could steal one.
Yeah. Attention ball players, upgrade your swing with the 2025 Soldier Tank Series from Soldier Sports. The BB Core model is built with infused power alloy technology and an ultra hot sweet spot that packs power even on mishits. Looking for extra control? The 2-piece BB Core version delivers extra extreme whip and leverage. And for our rising stars, the USSSA Youth Bat brings elite performance in a youth-friendly design. Backed by 2.5 years of research, it's time to drop tanks with the tank. Visit soldiersports.us. All right, we're going to segue into what I think is my series of the weekend in North Carolina, number 6 in the country, visiting Jim Patterson Stadium to play the Louisville Cardinals, who are winning. They look good. It's an issue of we don't know exactly what we have with them quite yet. It's going to take ACC series after ACC series for that to happen. So I'm excited to see them against a team that is as good as North Carolina is and is probably going to be pretty hungry to bounce back after dropping a series to Stanford.
Yeah. And I think we saw the first weekend that this is a good Louisville team. Like, this is a good club. They played really well in a tough tournament field. And then they kind of went off and just sort of cruised for the most part against, teams you would expect them to cruise. But yeah, I'm super excited for this series as well. I think one of the big things with Louisville is that rotation looks really promising. Again, you can pile up strikeouts against, bad teams, but we knew Patrick Forbes was going to be good. He looks better than we might have thought he would be. We were hopeful for Parker Detmers, and it looks like he's really figuring it out. He's had some ups and downs, but he's definitely improved. Here, Michael has been just excellent in that third role. And so you take those three, and then you go to North Carolina, and you've got their three. And it seems like, on paper, it's similar to the Stanford UNC series where it's like, hey, we could get some really good pitching matchups. But then you have to consider both of these teams can hit. And so I think I'm really interested to see how this plays out. Is it going to be a little low scoring, or is it going to turn into, the Stanford series where there's like a 13-9 win and then 2 like really lopsided matchups? So I'm definitely interested in this one as well.
Yeah, it feels like one of those where we might get like a Saturday, maybe not quite what the BC Virginia Saturday game was, 22-16, right? Was the final score there. It feels like we might get like I said, like a Saturday slip up for an inning out of a starter, and then boom, the whole thing powder kegs, right? This is a series that's capable of that, although I do expect the pitching to be pretty crisp on both sides.
Yeah, no, I could certainly see that. And I just feel like both these teams have some guys that, actually both first basemen in this matchup. Hunter Stokely's been everything and more in his return. I think even the biggest North Carolina fans wouldn't expect him to have come and been like, okay, I hit, for power now consistently. Like that, that's been huge for them. And then on the other side, you have Louisville's Tage Davis, who, that first weekend, his first game, massive stakes for a freshman. goes 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts. And you're like, okay, big moment. Since then, he's barely striking out. He's drawing walks. He's hitting the cover off the ball. I think he has 6 home runs now. And he's just been, might be hitting like 420, somewhere around there. So he's been great to watch. So there's a lot of other good players on both teams, obviously, but it's pretty cool that, both those first basemen are just kind of, taking off to another level.
I'm with you. That's a fun matchup. And Gravy and I talked a few weeks ago about kind of the legacy guys in this ACC this year, and Take Davis is one of them. His father, Ben, former first pick, catcher in the bigs. It's cool to see because I had seen him come across, I think, some events in Cary at the USA Baseball National Training Complex. So I had seen him as a high school star on a couple of occasions. And to anticipate him as part of this freshman class for Louisville and see him there and see it pan out, he had a monster weekend this past weekend. So yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of fun when we get guys like that as standout freshmen. And just to your point, to compare him to the veteran first baseman coming off of an injury, Hunter Stokely, who was with his guys all the way through a trip to Omaha last year and was, devastated that he could not contribute to that team. To see him come back out and be performing the way he is, it's cool to see, and it's not that we don't see it, but I think it's to have an elder player like Stokely, as well as a freshman, a true freshman, in that matchup that we're most excited to see. I don't know that it's as prevalent as it used to be with, the portal being used with the way that it's being used and that sort of. So it's cool. It's cool to me to see true freshmen, very experienced Hunter Stokely. They're both breaking out as kind of the mastheads for both offenses to this point.
Yeah, for sure. No, that is a good 6th year and a first year. Yeah,
pretty cool. Notre Dame at Clemson, who just continues to roll on. That is their final one before they've got Wake Forest at home next weekend. So not to jump ahead a week on a preview, but assuming Clemson and Wake Forest both take care of business like we probably expect them to, Wake Forest has got Miami. That's a huge series next weekend. It could be a lot of fun. So Miami at Wake Forest. I really like what I've said this on other shows. I really like what I've seen from Miami. I'm intrigued by that team. And I think that's just going to grow and grow as the season goes on.
Yeah. I would say intrigued is a good description of how I feel about them. The worry I have is they started the year obviously against, Northeast opponents for the most part, kind of cruised, pitching looked incredible. They have been getting shelled, and they're not getting length out of their starters. And that is the last possible thing you want when you are about to play at Wake Forest. Yeah. Like you want your starters to go in there being like, okay, I can give you 5 solid innings today. The last 4 or 5, last 4 starts, including this recent midweek against UCF, every single starter's given up 5 or 6 runs. And it's like, you can't dig a hole against Wake Forest and expect to come out of it. Because when that team gets hot, it's like over. It's what happened to Notre Dame twice, 19-5 and 11-1. When they got a good start out of Jackson Denny's in that middle game, they were able to be right there, hang in there, take it, end up losing late. But I'm a little worried about Miami going there, just with how the last 2 weekends against good teams, UConn and Florida, just with how those two weekends have gone. And maybe it's a statement weekend. Maybe it's like, hey, Griffin Hugas, Brian Walters, Nick Robert, like this is a get right, like show, what you can really do. Or it's, this is 3 straight weekends of, man, we're just getting rocked. So I think that's an interesting thing to consider going into that series.
Yeah. I'm beginning to think Wake Forest is creeping into the upper tier. Like we talk about Florida State, North Carolina, Clemson kind of being the class through the A tier of the ACC so far this year. I think Wake has just kind of been lying in the weeds, ready to burst into that tier with them. And it's for no other reason than where they were ranked in the preseason, right? I mean, that's kind of how we do this thing. But Wake's really good. And I had concerns about them offensively, I guess, would have been the biggest question mark coming into the year. But with the way Merrick Houston has developed, the rest of the team is contributing in a ways that I don't know that I anticipated. You never quite know what you're going to get out of transfers. So, but they've had some big I mean, that's a big time lineup.
And that's fair. The transfer portal is you can look at these players as they come in and say, okay, they did this here. Let's project this. But the success rate Wake Forest is having, like the best hitter this year, arguably on that team has not been Merrick Houston. It's been Cade Lewis. He's hitting 476, 7 doubles, 4 home runs. The way that 2 through, honestly, even just the whole lineup, the way it sets up is you got to face Merrick, you got to face Ethan Conrad, who's playing his way into, top 10, high first round guy. You've got Cade Lewis, who's just on base all the time, 560 OBP. You got Dalton Wentz, who doesn't look like a freshman. You got Jack Winay in there somewhere too, who's just always under the radar. He's got 7 home runs. And then you've got all these other pieces like, Matt Scannell, Antonio Morales. Like you have just, it's just a lot for any team to deal with. It's not a surprise they're hitting. I think the biggest positive development that makes me really kind of believe in Wake Forest a bit more, long-term is they're still trying to kind of pin down that third starter. And I think Blake Morningstar this past week against Notre Dame looked fantastic. He was great, before that. Because I do think Joe Ariola out of the pen probably makes a bit more sense, especially with, Will Ray, unfortunately done for the year. But even with all that being said, you have, Lavonis and Chris Lavonis and Duncan Marston, 2 freshmen coming back that are expected to be potential rotation pieces. So it just feels like with each passing week, Wake is building, a lot of momentum. And so that's another reason why I'm a little worried for how Miami will fare there in that road environment.
Yeah, it makes sense. Man, they've just got guys they can depend on too. And it's not been a big deal that they haven't quite locked in that third starter spot. So like even when Morningstar's not been particularly sharp, they can send in a Griffin Green to like kind of clean it up and get it back on track and level so that the lineup can put some runs in. It's gotten sticky a couple of times for him, but I really like Josh Gunther as their closer type also. They've used Hayden LaFew in some leverage spots. Like they're deep, man. They're really deep. And you mentioned the rest of the guys in the lineup. Houston, Conrad, and Winay all with 7 home runs right now. But Lewis is kind of he's the engine of it, really, in a lot of ways, because he's just a line drive machine. It's constant bat to ball. They're good. This started with me saying I think they're working their way into that upper tier, and the more we talk about it, the more I'm convincing myself that they are. So it's a really, really exciting team. Anything else on the slate? Let me think of let me get back to my page here that's got the series. Who did we not mention?
Yeah. I think an interesting series is Virginia Tech at NC State.
I knew there was one more. That was it.
Yeah, and Pitt Georgia Tech should be a good series as well, and Notre Dame obviously is going down to Clemson. But that NC State series, shameless plug, got a piece on NC State going on the site soon. But that team is starting to show, the signs of why we were so high on them in the preseason. They're pitching. Duden is got his feel for a slider back. Looks as disgusting as he did last year. Derek Smith pitched in midweek action, first appearance of the year, struck out 3 as he would do. And then that lineup, like the guys are starting to hit. And the big thing, I was talking to Elliot Avon about this, is quality at bats. They're stacking them, and they've won 9 in a row. And you can point at the teams they've played and said, Campbell's in there, which is a nice win, but there's some lower tier teams. But I think they're really starting to hit their stride, which is good, because if you put them into ACC play after that 5-game losing streak, I think it would have gone terribly. But they were sort of able to use these 2 weeks to get right, and guys throughout that lineup are really starting to hit, and everyone's pitching well. Ryan Marone looks unhittable. He drew a Tom Glavine comp, so it's exciting stuff for NC State. And on the flip side, Virginia Tech's going to be kicking themselves that they did not take that series against Georgia Tech. They were tied in the 9th in the 3rd game. They won the middle game, and they were leading in the 9th in the 1st. So it's one of those things where you're 1-2 now, but you were right there, and you just got some things to iron out in the bullpen. But I really like that team too. So I'm excited to see how this one plays out.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it the way that you did about NC State, because it felt like, or it feels like, the extra week of non-conference play was to their benefit. So it actually kind of worked out for them now that they're entering the ACC and they get Virginia Tech this weekend. I'm really excited to see, not that the lineups that Marone has been performing against aren't capable, because you still got to go out there and you still got to strike out batters. And he was so sharp in those last 2, the 7-inning complete game against Canisius, and then the full 9-inning complete with the career high in strikeouts that got him ACC Pitcher of the Week. He's good. And Dom Fritton looks like Dom Fritton. Like they're just, they could, I don't know that they get back up to number 12 in the country at any point. It's just kind of a weird, again, it's all logistical, and it kind of depends on how you fall out, where you start, the rankings, and that sort of thing. But like, they're good. They are still a good team, and the younger guys in the lineup have begun to find themselves as hitters. So yeah, no, that's an exciting one. That's another exciting one that I'm excited to lay eyes on and see again the pitching against ACC talent. Not that these are guys that we haven't seen pitch against ACC competition, right? We know what they're capable of, and it's just like a matter of getting Fritton and Marone and Duden and Smith on a roll going into conference play, because then we kind of know what to expect. So yeah, that'll be a good one also. Man, full weekend. Here we go. We've got it. We've got it here. I'm excited. So that's it. That covers everything. He's Bradley Smart. You guys be sure to subscribe, read his stuff on ACC Extra. It's been a ton of it. It's all great, I promise you. And that's it. Nothing else to plug. That's it. It's over. That's our speed run through a weekend preview. Brad, thank you. And we'll talk again next week.
All right. Thanks for having me.